Right, a lot to cover today, so we're going to just jump right into it. This is a lecture on the specific major muscles most involved in ankle and or subtalar joint, subtalar and transverse tarsal joint motion influence at the ankle and subtalar joints. I say either or because you're going to see you have certain muscles that influence both joints. Okay. So, quick review. Not going to spend a lot of time on this. If you need more information, contact me. I could send you a link to my ankle lecture reminder. But the subtalar and transverse tarsal joints live underneath the ankle joint. The ankle, the talocrural joint, talus fitting into the socket formed by the tibia and the fibula. Nice and, a really traditional socket. Underneath the talus lies these other dorsal bones that glide and kind of shift and summate motion on a smaller level. That's the subtalar joint. So for your circle, this is the first circle that we're going to get to that's appendicular, that's extremity. Your cervical, your trunk, there was only one of those. So literally right and left meant my right side, my left side, my right ear, my left ear. You don't have that terminology when you're dealing with extremities, okay, because they're independent. My right elbow, the muscles that influence my right elbow have nothing to do with my left. Here, if I shorten the muscles on the right, I lengthen the muscles on the left, right? They are that the right side, my left side influence the same thing. Here, my right side is independent from my left side. So we are going to look at the cross-sectional anatomy from only the right side. Why? Because most everybody's right-handed, but the same muscles that are on the right ankle and subtalar joint you have on the left. So you don't have to mirror two circles. That would be very, very confusing if you had to learn the same information to mirror images of each other. Okay, so all you have to do is reference one side, and then if the left is doing something that you're trying to figure out, you still do external force. I see that it's my plantar flexors. Who are my plantar flexors? Well, the right side plantar flexors are the same as the left side plantar flexors. So you could still reference your right-sided circle to answer muscle function. Okay, that's number one. The second thing is I drew here to show you kind of how this works. The circles are just a summary. It's a so what of a somewhat circular area of your segment and the muscles in regard to how they cross joints. So here we have a foot. We're looking at it like this on the board, right? And the ankle joint is represented by our bilateral axis, a traditional point about which ankle joint rotation occurs about. The subtalar joint is kind of an average. Even though, remember how I said that in orthorodal glidings, there's not one true point? That's true, but we can have an average. The average of all the little glides runs somewhat at a combination of sagittal frontal, mostly obviously frontal, with this axis being mostly anterior posterior, but technically it runs in between that first and second ray, that big toe, right? These two piggies. And it runs between those two. That's why toe off, man, your big toe is so much bigger, thicker. It's one reason also why your big toe has specialized big extra muscles on there, all dealing with that subtalar joint kind of running in between these two digits. And then you're going to see how these digits all kind of have a one muscle that kind of fans out to all of them, because all of these little piggies are kind of all working together. And this little piggy gets specialized muscles because it's a very important piggy. So AP axis is going to represent your subtalar and transverse tarsal joints. Another thing to remember, being that your subtalar is under, these two axes do not intersect like two highways intersect. Meaning that if you're at a four-way stop and you could literally stop in the middle and be on different roads at the same time. That's not how this works. The ankle joint is on top of the subtalar. Submarine under. Subtalar joint is under the ankle joint. So this is more like an intersection. An overpass, where you have one road underneath and then the overpass goes over the top. So they intersect, but not at the same place. They intersect in the same area, but not in the same place. So your ankle joint circle, the so what, all we did is we just took a circle of this area right here and we put it here, and we just left out the piggies. So for your ankle circle, we are not looking at transverse plane because your ankle doesn't rotate in the transverse plane. We're looking at muscles that cross the ankle joint, anterior, posterior. If the muscles cross anterior, they're going to be dorsiflexors. How do I know? You go to your shoe and you pull on your shoestring, which is anterior to your ankle joint. You pull on that shoestring up, and you're going to pull in the direction of dorsiflexion. Okay? Posterior crossing muscles are going to be plantar flexors. How do I know? If you go to the lip, the tongue, not the tongue of your shoe, but the heel lip, and you pull up, you're going to pull in the direction of plantar flexion. So posterior crossing muscles, plantar flexors, anterior crossing muscles, dorsiflexors. Now again, because these are extremities, we literally have a right arm and a left arm. The right of the right and the left of the right makes no sense. And the right of the right is actually different than the right of the left. One is on the inside, the other's on the outside. So what terms do we use to communicate the right of a right, the left of a right, the medial and lateral? That's where that comes from. So this is a right ankle and subtalar joint cross section. This is my lateral side, the outside, and this is my medial side, the inside. So inverters, muscles that pull in the direction of inversion, are going to be medial crossing muscles. Muscles that cross this average AP axis more on the inside. And these are going to be everters, outside crossing muscles. And again, you could do this experiment. You grab the outside of your shoe and you pull laterally. It's going to be pulling in a direction of eversion. Or you could look at it as the inside lip of your shoe if you want. Your medial lip, you're going to pull in the direction of inversion. So we're going to have dorsiflexors, plantar flexors, everters, inverters. Some muscles are going to be in these quadrants, just like our neck and trunk muscles are. So if a muscle is in this anteromedial quadrant, it's going to be a dorsiflexor and an inverter. Dorsiflexor, inverter. Seeing it in the two different things flips the image. So that's why sometimes I might have to check myself because I need to remember that it's from this perspective. Dorsiflexor inverter, dorsiflexor everter, plantar flexor everter, plantar flexor inverter. And then this is going to be the first circle where you're going to see muscles sit a fence. What I mean by that is you typically hear this cliche, if someone can't make up their mind, they're sitting the fence. In other words, are you on this side or that side? I'm right down the middle. I sit the fence. So you're going to see a couple muscles. It's your big calf muscles, your gastrocnemius and your soleus. They are actually going to sit on the anterior posterior axis as fence, meaning that they neither cross medial nor lateral. They are neither inverters nor everters. All they are big, powerful plantar flexors. So I'm going to show you how that works when we get into the circle. So what I wanted to do at the beginning is lay out the setup for your circles. Then I'm going to talk about the muscles individually, just like we did with the neck and trunk muscles. This is the tibialis anterior. Look how it crosses. Look how it crosses in the front. Look how it crosses on the medial. And we'll talk about function based on you seeing how the muscles pull. Because remember, this is just a cheat sheet for function. You still need to know kind of how those muscles run. And function does not care about origin or insertion. It's how does it cross. Okay, origin and insertion, very important for some majors, but it has nothing to do with function. Function is, does it cross a joint? Where does it cross? How does it cross? That's what determines function, okay? So I'm going to turn off the lights. I'm going to put on the overhead, and we're going to look at some ankle and subtalar joint muscles, okay? On two. Ready? Break. All right, let me back this up a little bit so we could see the whole thing. Okay, guys, remember, this is muscles most involved. Um, the first thing you're going to notice is you have some little muscles inside the foot and then some bigger muscles that kind of come from the outside. It's those outside muscles that we're really concerned with. I say outside, muscles that cross, that come from other areas of the body. We call those extrinsic muscles that cross from outside. These little muscles, we call those intrinsic muscles inside the joint itself. And those intrinsic muscles serve very little, I say very little, but they're a little smaller. They don't take up a lot of space. And they serve more dexterity, stabilizing, little extra intrinsic muscles. Intrinsic muscles can't influence large-scale joint motions because they stay within the area, and they're like these little muscles are important for like bowing out the toes, right? But because they live inside, they don't cross outside, they're not going to influence ankle motion because they don't cross the ankle joint, okay? So these are extrinsic muscles. Extrinsic just means crossing. They come and they cross, right? First one, we're going to talk about the tibialis anterior. A lot of these muscles have spatial relationship names to them. Tibialis anterior, a muscle that runs along the tibia, that runs in the front. It's a front crossing muscle along the tibia. So you look at this, that origin of it, where does it anchor onto that bone? It's kind of lateral, right? Look, this is the medial part of the tibia. This is the lateral part of the tibia. So if you just think of it in terms of origin, you might think that this muscle crosses lateral, but it doesn't. It doesn't matter where a muscle starts. It's where it crosses. So here you could see that string of the tibialis anterior. This is an anterior view of the foot. How do I know? There are my toes. I don't see my calcaneus. Crosses the ankle joint in the front. That means it's going to pull in the direction of dorsiflexion. It's going to be a dorsiflexor. It's going to be a dorsiflexor not because of its contraction. Irrelevant. It's going to be a dorsiflexor because it pulls that way regardless of contraction. It pulls that way at rest. It pulls that way when you're dead. It pulls that way isometrically, concentric, eccentrically. It pulls. Why? Because that's what muscles do. Muscles only pull. And how does it pull? In a direction of dorsiflexion, making it a dorsiflexor. In addition to being a dorsiflexor, remember, here's our kind of our setup for inversion and eversion, big toe, middle toe. Look how it is medial, crosses more on the inside. So the tibialis anterior, in addition to being an ankle joint dorsiflexor, it's going to be a subtalar and transverse dorsal joint inverter. Dorsiflexor, inverter. Two different functions at two different joints, okay? Next, we're going to go to our extensor hallucis longus, okay? It's a big toe extensor. This is an extrinsic muscle crossing the ankle joint anteriorly, so it's going to be a dorsiflexor. It's on the medial side of Mama Piggy and her first baby, so it's going to be a dorsiflexor inverter. Now, where we really get some benefit from these toe extensors, and how do you know it's a toe extensor? It's the toenail side, right? Finger flexion, toe flexion, finger extension, toe extension, okay? Now, we'll get to that later, but these muscles really assist in terms of pulling in the direction of dorsiflexion when you got shoes on. Why? Because your toes can push on your toe box, and pushing on the toe box creates a rigid link that can then transfer that force into the ankle. That's why when you walk in sandals, your gait kind of changes because those toes don't have anything to push on. They're just kind of free. They're like, push, oh, whoa, there's nothing there to, there's nothing, they're stiff to push about, okay? So extensor hallucis. Hallucis is toes, phalanx is thumb. So hallux is just Latin for big toe. So an extensor of the big toe that is a dorsiflexor because it crosses the ankle in the front. Subtalar joint inverter because it crosses the subtalar joint inside, medial side. Okay, moving right along, we have the piggies, the muscle that innervates piggy influence in a direction of extension. So how this works is if you had a cadaver and you were to grab a hold of this extensor digitorum longus, grabbed it and pulled, all 4 of the piggies would pull in a direction of extension. The reason you kind of do that is because you do not have the dexterity in your feet that you do in your hands. In the hands, you have a lot more muscles that have their own strings that pull. Here, you don't really paint, write, do things with your toes that you do in your hands. So you can kind of have one rope, one muscle that branches to the other 4 to just pull them all at the same time. Longus is kind of fun. It's actually not the muscle that's long, it's the tendon that's long. I'm going to show you that differentiation when we do peroneus longus and brevis. But longus actually means long tendon. So if you have a long tendon, that means you have a short muscle. So that's kind of contradictory to your instinct. Long muscle, short muscle, long tendon. Okay. So extensor digitorum with a long tendon, pulling in the direction of extension on those toe digits. Those toe digits can then push on, remember, muscles only pull, but segments can push, bones can push, we can push, but our muscles pull, okay? Dorsiflexor, now, subtalar joint, this is lateral to my anterior posterior average axis, so the toe extensors are actually going to be everters. Dorsiflexor, everters, okay? Let's see if the peroneus tertius is on this picture. Nope. Okay. Time to move on to the next. Now, notice, even though these muscles start, the tibialis anterior, anterolateral, extensor digitorum, longus, anterolateral, none of them cross the knee joint. We're going to get to the one ankle influencer that crosses the knee joint. That's your gastroc, your calf, in a little bit. We'll talk about what that means. All right, that was the anterior view. Let's look at the lateral view. These are all muscles that cross laterally. So right away, you should be like, oh, lateral crossing muscles? Well, if I pulled on the outside of my foot, I would pull in a direction of eversion. And you would be right. These are going to be all everters. There's the strings for the digits, for the toes, right? We see those guys. Then you have this family of peroneals. Peroneus, peroneo, potato, doesn't matter. You have the peroneus longus and brevis. And these are posterolateral crossing muscles. In other words, they cross the ankle joint not in the front, but in the back. There's my bilateral axis. Posterior crossing muscles. Again, it doesn't matter that they insert anterior. It's how do they cross, okay? So these muscles start laterally. There's the fibula head. They come across here. And the brevis kind of comes along and inserts at the base of your fifth metatarsal. The kids, when they roll their subtalar joint, a lot of times because their bones aren't fused, it'll lop off a chunk of that bony knob right there. I think I've been out of the athletic training game for a long time, but I think we call that a Jones fracture. So, but the key thing I want to show you is tendon length and muscle length. So longus and brevis. Again, our instinct is to think a muscle that's long, peroneus longus, but it's actually a very short muscle, and it turns into a tendon early, and the tendon is super long. And actually, look, it keeps going, longus, right, all the way. It goes all the way over here. Brevis down here. So brevis is actually a longer muscle with a shorter tendon, okay? Peroneus longus and brevis. They're what we call sister muscles. Sister muscle is a concept of two muscles that share the same function at a particular joint or joints, okay? So longus and brevis, ankle joint plantar flexors, subtalar joint everters, plantar flexor everters. And if they're sisters, meaning that they share a lot of DNA the same, they have a cousin. Cousin has something in common. You're related some kind of way, but then there's other parts of the family you're not have in common. So that's how I like to think of this peroneus tertius. This peroneus tertius has something in common. It has a common relative, a common ancestor. The eversion pull is the same. The lateral pull is the same. But unlike the longus and the brevis, who are plantar flexors, the tertius is a dorsiflexor, okay? Dorsiflexor everter. Cool deal? So again, origins and insertions. Look at where this one comes here, brevis stops there. For some of you who are going to go on to massage therapy school, physical therapy school, orthopedics, athletic training, man, you need to know these origins, right? You're palpating on origins, and there's certain aspects of origins for massage that you need to know. But for what my students, my students, all have in common, the personal trainers, my personal trainers don't need to know origin. My physical educators don't need to know origin. Most of the people in this class may or may not need to know origin insertion, but you know what you're going to need to know? Function. What do these muscles do? And then you can learn function in athletic training school, in graduate school, PT school. But what you're going to know more than all those other students is, what do they do? Because you're going to understand what they do is based on how they cross. Function, okay? All right, let's keep rolling. We're making our way around. We started anteriorly, we went laterally. Now we're going to start on the posterior crossing muscles. The gastrocnemius, the big, powerful calf muscle, okay? Gastrocnemius technically has two heads. It has a medial inside head and it has a lateral head. Important here is that, yes, it crosses the ankle posteriorly. That literally is like you pulling on the posterior lip of your shoe. You pull that back lip up and the front of your foot wants to go down. That's what we call a first-class lever function, a redirection of an applied force. If you have a teeter-totter and you push this side down, the other side is going to go up. So same thing here. You pull the back part up and the front side is going to go down. This muscle, powerful plantar flexor. But notice how straight down the line this thing goes. There's the talus, calcaneus. There is no medial, lateral. Look, this muscle may be medial and that muscle may be lateral, but the rope that they're pulling on runs straight down the pipe. How does it cross? How does it cross? Some people mistakenly think that the medial gastrocs an inverter and the lateral gastrocs an everter, and they base it off of this one's more on the inside. Guys, the rope that they're pulling on right down the pipe. Okay? Here's a key thing though. See that gastroc? Look how high it goes. That's my knee joint. So my gastroc crosses my knee joint posteriorly. So right away you should be like, whoa, crosses the knee posteriorly. It's going to be a knee flexor. Okay? It's going to be a knee flexor when we get to knee function muscles. All right? Pay attention to, this is the first muscle that I give you that's biarticular, meaning that it biarticular. We've had biarticular muscles down here, right? Technically ankle and subtalar joint. Biarticular, two different joints. But this is crossing two different joints from a distance. And what happens is that if you take a TheraBand and you stretch it, and you could measure the pull force of that TheraBand, and you know that the more you stretch it, the more it wants to return to its original shape. That's a property of elasticity. Any rubber band, TheraBand, the more you stretch it, the more it wants to return to its original shape. Unless you stretch it too much, then it pops. Muscles have similar characteristics. Yes, they have innervation pull force mechanisms, the contractile components, but they have stretchy stuff. We talked about this in 310, elastic stuff, stuff that doesn't respond to stimulation, stuff that if you zap it with electricity, it doesn't do anything unless you stretch it. Inert, stretchy materials that influence pull force. And the concept here is that if you have a muscle, I'm going to take the TheraBand and instead of doing this, I'm going to do it like this to represent the gastrocnemius. If that muscle has a certain amount of pull force because of its elastic properties, the longer the muscle is, the more you stretch it, the more it's going to want to pull at both ends. So think about your hamstrings, right? When you flex your hip, those hamstrings pull more. Come back here. So therefore, if you stretch it more, it pulls more. If you lessen the stretch, it's going to pull less. If you shorten it, if you slack it, if you put it on slack, it loses the stretchy mechanical properties of pull force from the elastic properties, and it's going to pull less. So the gastrocnemius is the same thing. If you flex your knee, if you bend your knee, you put that gastrocnemius on slack, you shorten it, and therefore it's going to pull less on the bottom. When you flex your knee, that muscle pulls less as a plantar flexor. It lessens its contribution as a plantar flexor because you put it on slack. That's why seated calf lifts don't emphasize the gastrocnemius. Now, the gastrocnemius still can pull, but it can't pull as much as if it was stretched out, if it had more length, okay? Elastic properties of muscles. I love introducing physics concepts with muscles because this is stuff we understand. So I introduced a concept of a first-class lever, right? Gastroc pulls up on this end and the foot goes down on the other end. That's a function of a simple machine that I'm going to teach you, and I'm going to reference this and be like, oh yeah, okay, I get that. Another function we have are pulley functions. Muscles can serve as pulleys, and it happens all over in the body, where you have a muscle that is deep more means more inside, and then you have a muscle that is on top of it that's more superficial, and the muscle that's more superficial gets a piggyback mechanism from the one that's deep. And the piggyback is, if I have a muscle that's deep and a muscle on top of it, that muscle on top of it has a better mechanical angle of pull as a joint influencer. Okay, it helps its angle, kind of like a patella, but instead of a bone, it's a muscle. The muscle serves as the pulley. So underneath, look, we cut the gastroc, and we're looking underneath, and we have a soleus. And a soleus is like a solefish, and that's like a flounder, like a flat fish. The soleus and the gastroc actually blend into the same common tendon down here, your Achilles tendon. And some people refer to this whole mechanism, your medial head of your gastroc, the lateral head of your gastroc, and the soleus, as a tricep surae. So instead of a tricep brachii, a tricep surae area of the lower leg. So soleus, gastroc, big, powerful Achilles tendon. So what does the soleus do at the ankle? It does the exact same thing as the gastroc. It's an ankle joint plantar flexor that sits the AP axis, neither medial nor lateral. Plantar flexor. Doesn't cross the knee joint, so your knee position isn't going to affect this length tension relationship. This doesn't matter. So that's why seated calf raises emphasize other plantar flexors, such as the soleus, because its length isn't affected by knee position. Okay? Don't worry about that little plantaris. I'm just giving you major players, and that plantaris is a very small, feeble plantar flexor. Some of you don't even have it. It's not even found in a certain amount of population, 7 to 11%. I forgot what the number is, but don't worry about that. Moving right along, and listen. If you're like, man, he's going fast, this is all recorded. Just go and rewatch it. It's all good. Okay? It's all good. Let's look at some more of our posterior compartment muscles. These are, again, deeper to the gastrocnemius. We had a tibialis anterior, an anterior tibial muscle. Well, here we have a tibialis posterior, a posterior tibial muscle. The tibialis posterior is one of my favorite muscles of the lower leg. It's super cool. First of all, what's its function? Crosses the ankle joint in the back posteriorly. Look, there's the heel. This is a posterior view. Look how it runs medial. So it's going to pull in the direction of inversion, and plantar flexion, pullers. Inversion, pullers is an inverter. Plantar flexion puller is a plantar flexor. I mentioned that in the previous video. If you're having trouble, or if you're studying from a book that says this muscle's function is plantar flexion, add puller. Plantar flexion puller. Inversion puller. muscles. Remember, we do not associate muscles with motion. That's going to get you in trouble. Tibialis posterior. Now, one of my favorite things about the tibialis posterior, it's an arch supporting muscle. So people that have arch problems in their foot, whether it's because of ligamentous problems, spring ligament in there is a special ligament that helps support the arch. The plantar fascia is something that goes from your heel to your toes that helps support the arch. But muscles also help support the arch. That's one thing we kind of lose track on, that you can actually increase the strength and the fatigue resistance of plantar flexor inverters, such as the tibialis posterior, to help you maintain a better arch. It's really cool. And there's some exercises that you can do to really emphasize that tibialis posterior. So this kind of shows you where the tibialis posterior comes. Look at that sucker, man. Look at all those key bones in there. Look at all those tarsal bones that it kind of crosses to pull. So origin doesn't matter. Insertion doesn't matter. For function, how does it cross? Posteromedial. Posterior for the ankle, medial for the subtalar. It's a plantar flexor inverter. Okay. We had extensor hallucis, an extensor of the big toe that crosses the ankle, so therefore it's a dorsiflexor. Well, we have a flexor of the big toe, flexor hallucis longus. Here we go, kind of starts back here, look, fibula, but even though the fibula is on the outside, doesn't matter, crosses on the inside, therefore that's why it's an inverter. Again, if you just look at origin, you may say, oh, outside origin, must be everter. That doesn't matter. This muscle could start here, 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 here. It could do loop-de-loops. Where does it cross? I sounded like the genie from Aladdin. Here, 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 here. The exits are here, 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 here. Flexor hallucis longus, plantar flexor because of its posterior crossing at the ankle joint. Inverter because of its medial crossing of the subtalar joint. We had extensor digits. Well, guess what? We have flexor digits. Flexor digits, posteromedial crossings. So some of my athletic trainers and some of my students that work in clinics might have heard these kind of little tricks to learn these posteromedial compartments. Tom, Dick, and Harry. Tom is tibialis posterior, Dick is flexor digitorum longus, Harry is flexor hallucis longus, and the and actually means for something, artery and nerve. It kind of runs in that order. So these are the Tom, Dick, and Harry muscles. Posteromedial crossing muscles, plantar flexors, inverters. All right, before we end with our circle, I wanted to do this for you guys, and that is listings. I have no problem with listings. If you want to remember agonistic group muscles, specific muscles within agonistic groups, you could do lists, but I'm going to point out some of the limitations with it, and then we'll go into our circles, and I'll show you why the circles are much cleaner. So dorsiflexors, tibialis anterior, extensor hallucis longus, extensor digitorum, peroneus tertius. Everters, peroneus tertius, extensor digitorum longus, peroneus longus, peroneus brevis. Plantar flexors, tibialis posterior, flexor hallucis longus, flexor digitorum longus, gastroc soleus, peroneus longus, peroneus brevis. Notice there's like, okay, well, that's working with that here, but then that's not working with that here. There's sometimes this is with these muscles, but sometimes that's with those muscles. You see, you get a lot of cross because sometimes the tibialis anterior works with the tibialis posterior, and sometimes it doesn't. The tibialis anterior and posterior are antagonist. They have antagonistic pull at the ankle joint, but they have agonistic pull at the subtalar joint. So listings are great, but the cross section gets confusing. In addition, if we reversed it and I said, what's the functions of the tibialis anterior, and you have these lists memorized, well, then you got to check every file in your database. Tibialis anterior, let me check. Okay, it's there. Okay, check. No, not there. Okay, check. No, not there. Oh, there it is right there. Versus seeing one circle with all of these muscles only listed once. And I'm going to say, what does the tibialis anterior do? And you're going to say, well, how does the tibialis anterior cross? It crosses anteromedial. Therefore, it's a dorsiflexor inverter. Done. Okay? So these are your functions if you were to list them. Now we're going to look at our functions if you were to see them. Check it out. Also, your next test is going to be the muscles of the lower extremity. So we're going to have ankle, subtalar, knee, and hip. And that's it. Okay, it's a lot of muscles. And then the third test will be upper extremity muscles. And then we'll have the traditional biomechanical Newton kind of stuff. So guys, here's your circle. Bilateral axis, that's your ankle joint. Things that cross in the front are dorsiflexors. Things that cross in the back, plantar flexors. There's your AP axis, anterior to posterior, subtalar joint. The medial crossings are inverters. The lateral crossings are everters. And look, there's your key. This is what tells you, hey, here's your representation of your ankle. Here's representation of your subtalar. And NA stands for not applicable. The polar axis doesn't matter at the ankle and subtalar joint. If it does, you've had a bad day because you probably have a high ankle sprain, a talocrural joint sprain, an ankle mortise sprain. Your socket bones, your tibia and your fibula got bowed out because you had transverse plane rotation forces at your talus, and there's nowhere for that talus to go. There's nowhere for that talus to go in the transverse plane in there. So if you torque that foot in the transverse plane and that talus starts to rotate in its transverse plane, it's pushing out, it's popping out the tibia and the fibula, and that's a bad day. Who are your dorsiflexors? The anterior crossing muscles. Tibialis anterior, extensor hallucis longus, extensor digitorum longus, peroneus tertius. 310 taught you to figure out what group of muscles are working. Like when I heel strike and the gravity on my front foot and the ground reaction force on my heel is trying to plantar flex me. And I need that plantar flexion to happen at my own speed, slower than what those external forces are trying to offer. So I'm going to need eccentric contraction of my dorsiflexors to allow the plantar flexion to occur at the speed that I need to transition from heel strike to foot flat. I need dorsiflexors to work eccentrically to control the plantar flexion speed. Who are my dorsiflexors? Those people. Tibialis anterior, extensor hallucis longus, extensor digitorum longus, peroneus tertius. This helps me remember who they are. The circle helps me remember the functions. If you wanted to reverse it another way, you're in school and someone's like, what does the tibialis anterior do? Well, what does it do contraction-wise depends on what exercise you're doing or depending on what you're doing. But what does it do directional pull-wise? It's a dorsiflexor inverter. And I didn't have to go through a list. I didn't have to, wait, 1 second, let me check here. Okay, oh, it's there, dorsiflexor, okay, not there, not there. This shortcut. This is a shortcut. What does the tibialis posterior do? Plantar flexor inverter, because I can see how it sits in class. Tibialis posterior, plantar flexor inverter. Posteromedial crossing muscle. Okay? Dorsiflexors, plantar flexors. Why do you have so many plantar flexors? Because you need those muscles to move your weight. When you plantar flex and you push off of the ground, you got to move all this stuff. Makes sense, you got more of them. Okay? Peroneus brevis, peroneus longus, soleus, gastroc, tibialis posterior, flexor digitorum longus, flexor hallucis longus. Who are the inverters? The medial crossing muscles. Now notice, These, the soleus and the gastroc, are on boxes, and the boxes are on the axis. The boxes sit the fence. So don't freak out about, well, this part of the soleus is medial and that part of the soleus is lateral. Nah, it's just a box that's balancing on the fence. It is neither medial nor lateral, okay? Inverters, everters, lateral pulling muscles, medial pulling muscles, anterior pulling muscles, posterior pulling muscles, okay? Remember, 310 taught you to identify who's working as a group. 415 is going to help you to identify who's in that group. Nothing in this circle says eccentric, concentric, isometric, nothing. Direction of pull, function. That's why 310 is a prereq for this class, because I taught you in there how to figure out who's working. Who do I need? Do I need these guys? Do I need these guys? Do I need these guys? That's 310. 415 says, who are those guys? Who are those guys specifically? Okay. For a life analogy, if there's a situation in my house where I need the fire department, I identify the need. I need the fire department. I'm going to call the fire department. 415 analogy is like, once the fire department shows up, who are those heroes? Who are those people? What are their names? Who are the people? Okay. All right. A lot of cool information here that's easily learned. The functions of any individual muscle. What's the function of the soleus? At the ankle, it's a plantar flexor. What's the function of the tibialis posterior? At the ankle, plantar flexor, subtalar joint, inverter. Function of the tibialis anterior, ankle, dorsiflexor, subtalar joint, inverter. Now, how do you stretch muscles? Well, you got to move it in the opposite direction of its pull. If the TheraBand is trying to pull my hands together, I stretch the TheraBand by pulling my hands apart. Not rocket science. How do I stretch plantar flexors? By dorsiflexing. That's why if you get on a heel cord board, you want to dorsiflex to stretch that of which pulls in the opposite direction. How do I stretch inverters, evert? How do I stretch everters, invert? How do I stretch dorsiflexors, plantar flex? You get the picture. Okay? So, next test. These muscles, knee, hip. The third test is going to be wrist, elbow, radial ulna, shoulder, scapula. And then the last test is going to be the more traditional mechanics. Okay? Watch, rewatch, practice. I'll do once I get the muscles in, once I get the game plans in, then we could do some practice. I might even do a separate video of just some practice exercises. But guys, you can practice. You could do toe raises and say, okay, who do I need to recruit? I need my plantar flexors. Who are those muscles? That's how you practice. You could do some TheraBand resistance exercises with your subtalar joint, where the TheraBand's maybe trying to evert you, so you need to recruit the inverters. And then you notice, you're like, well, wait, I'm using the same muscles, whether I'm doing it concentrically, isometrically, or eccentrically. It's the same muscles. Yeah, because it's inverters the whole time, the muscles that pull in the direction of inversion, shortening while trying to shorten, concentrically, being lengthened while trying to shorten, eccentrically, not changing while trying to shorten. Notice the commonality, trying to shorten. That's why the group doesn't change. Trying to shorten. Pulling is trying to shorten. Okay. I hope this video helps. Rewatch it. Hit me up if you have any questions. Take care.